You are sleeping wrong. And I do not mean a little wrong, not even slightly off, but fundamentally, structurally, at the level of basic biology, wrong. And the proof has been sitting in medical archives, ancient literature, and a laboratory at the National Institute of Mental Health for decades. Though nobody told you, because fixing it does not require anything you can buy. Here is what they did tell you. Sleep for 8 hours, uninterrupted, every night without fail, or your health collapses. If you wake at 2 a.m. and cannot get back to sleep, something is broken in you. A disorder, a dysfunction, a symptom requiring intervention. To cure it, you are told to take this pill, buy this supplement, download this app, fix the problem. But what if waking up at 2 a.m. is not the problem? What if it is your body doing exactly what human bodies have done for the entirety of recorded history, right up until about 150 years ago, and the only reason it feels like a disorder is because we decided, very recently, to call it one? Roger Ekirch is a professor of history at Virginia Tech. He has spent 40 years reading diaries, court depositions, medical texts, ballads, poems, and literature from across the ancient and medieval world. In 2001, he published findings that rewrote the history of sleep. He found more than 500 references and has since found over 2,000 in over a dozen languages, stretching from Homer's Odyssey in the 8th century BC to accounts written as late as the early 20th century, all describing the same thing: first sleep and second sleep, with a quiet waking period in between. Not insomnia, not a disorder, just sleep, the way it always was. If everything you've been told about rest is built on an assumption that is 150 years old, then the question worth asking is this: what did the other 10,000 years look like? And what can they teach you about why you feel so exhausted right now? Stay with this, because the answer is not what you think. And it started long before anyone invented the word insomnia. In the 16th century, a typical household in England would go to bed shortly after sunset, around 8 or 9 in the evening. There were no streetlights, no screens. Once darkness fell, life contracted around whatever the fire could illuminate. And so people slept, deeply, quickly, surrendering to darkness because there was nothing else to do. 3 to 4 hours later, they woke up. They simply opened their eyes, lay quietly in the dark, and entered a state that was so unremarkable, so ordinary, that nobody thought to explain it. It needed no explanation. It was just what happened in the middle of the night. Ekirch found it everywhere. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, written in the 1380s, a character wakes naturally from her first sleep. In a 16th century Scottish ballad called Robin of Portingale, the lines read, "At the wakening of your first sleep, you shall have a hot drink made." In William Baldwin's satirical novel Beware the Cat, published in 1553, a character describes lying awake between his 2 sleeps, listening to the sounds of the house. These weren't dramatic events requiring narration. They were casual references, dropped into text the way you'd mention having lunch. Across Europe, people had specific names for it. In France, the premier somme, the first sleep. In Italy, the primo sonno. The period between them had a name too, the watch. That watching period was not wasted. People prayed. They reflected on their dreams, which were particularly vivid and memorable at that hour. Couples were intimate. Scholars wrote. Neighbors visited. Some ate. Some took herbal medicines thought to work better in the small hours. Farmers checked on their animals. It was, by all accounts, a period of unusual calm and quiet productivity. This was not just a European quirk. Ekirch found evidence of biphasic sleep, 2 distinct sleep periods separated by quiet wakefulness in West Africa, South America, Southeast Asia, and in indigenous communities across multiple continents. The Tiv people of central Nigeria had it. The Surinamese Maroons had it. It appears in the ancient texts of Rome. Julius Caesar's military histories reference prima nox, the first night, as distinct from what followed. Virgil's Aeneid, written in the 1st century BC, speaks of the hour that marks the end of first sleep, when the night has run half its course. Thucydides uses the Greek phrase apo protou hypnou, after the first sleep, as a casual time marker, the same way we would say around midnight. This was the baseline. This was normal human sleep for most of recorded history, on every inhabited continent. Which raises an obvious and disturbing question. When exactly did it become a disorder? The answer is precise, and it's uncomfortable. By 1807, gas streetlights were burning along a stretch of Pall Mall in London. It was the first time in human history that a city's streets could be lit, through the night, without fire. The technology spread fast. By 1823, nearly 40,000 gas lamps lined over 200 miles of London's streets. Factories extended their working hours into the evening, and then through the night. Productivity became the dominant virtue of industrializing society, and sleep, particularly the loose, broken, waking in the middle of the night kind, began to look inconvenient. By the 1820s, Ekirch documented, people's first sleep had already begun to stretch. The intervening wakefulness shrank. The second sleep compressed. Artificial light was suppressing melatonin, the hormone that signals darkness and initiates sleep, before people even went to bed. The natural rhythm that had governed human nights for millennia began to collapse into a single consolidated block. And here is where it becomes truly extraordinary. By the late 19th century, the same interrupted sleep that Chaucer had mentioned without comment, that Homer had referenced as obvious, that medical writers from the ancient world to the 16th century had treated as unremarkable, was suddenly categorized as a pathology, as insomnia, middle-of-the-night waking, and as something deeply wrong with you. The sleep industry followed. Sedatives, then sleeping pills, then a vast commercial ecosystem built around the idea that the goal was 8-hour unbroken unconsciousness. Anything less was failure. Any waking was a problem. But here is what nobody in that ecosystem mentioned. The 8-hour consolidated sleep is not an ancient biological standard. It is a Victorian industrial invention. It is, in the precise words of Ekirch himself, a modern creation, and possibly, at the biological level, an unstable one. The evidence for that instability did not come from a historian. It came from a laboratory. In the early 1990s, Thomas Ware, a psychiatrist and senior researcher at the National Institute of Mental Health in Bethesda, Maryland, ran an experiment that changed the field, although most people still have not heard of it. Ware took healthy male volunteers and placed them in rooms where artificial light was available for only 10 hours a day, and darkness lasted 14 hours. No phones, no screens, no control over what their bodies might decide to do. And then he waited. On the first night, participants slept an average of 11 hours. Ware concluded they were repaying what he called a chronic sleep debt, years of insufficient rest compressed into one night. By the fourth week, something else emerged. They were sleeping 8 hours on average, but not in one block. They were sleeping in 2 periods of roughly 4 to 5 hours each, separated by 1 to 2 hours of quiet, calm wakefulness. Melatonin levels spiked at the onset of each sleep period, exactly as the circadian system would predict. During the interval between them, the research team measured something unexpected. Prolactin, a hormone associated with deep calm, relaxation, and a distinctly meditative quality of consciousness, was elevated, significantly. The subjects described the period of wakefulness between their 2 sleeps as genuinely peaceful. Ware concluded that when you remove artificial light, human sleep reorganizes itself. it returns to a pattern that matches, with striking precision, the historical record Roger Ekirch had assembled from 1,000 years of diaries and literature. 2 sleeps, an interval. A biology that, it turns out, was never designed for 8 unbroken hours. Mary Cascadon, a sleep researcher at Brown University, reviewed both bodies of evidence and offered a conclusion that has stayed with clinicians ever since. Maybe, she said, the brain simply cannot keep you asleep for prolonged periods without disruption. Maybe biphasic sleep is not a relic. Maybe it is what the brain has always wanted to do. And if she is right, if the 8-hour model is the artificial construct and the broken night is the natural one, then an enormous proportion of what modern medicine classifies as middle-of-the-night insomnia is not a disorder at all. It is a body trying to return to a rhythm it was built for, in a world that has made that rhythm impossible. Which brings you to the only question that actually matters. The research is clear on this. A sleep specialist at Johns Hopkins named David Neubauer reviewed Ekirch's historical findings and offered a clinical observation that should be far more widely known. He said that the belief in consolidated sleep as the only acceptable norm may have created a secondary condition, sleep anxiety, that is now one of the most powerful drivers of chronic insomnia. You lie awake, you panic, the cortisol rises, the arousal deepens, and the second sleep that your body was perfectly prepared to take becomes impossible because you have convinced yourself that something has gone catastrophically wrong. But as it turns out, nothing has gone wrong. Your biology is doing something ancient and normal. The panic is the problem, not the waking. Here is what the evidence suggests you can actually do. Reduce your exposure to bright artificial light in the 2 hours before bed. It is the single most direct way to allow the melatonin system to behave the way it behaved for every human being who ever lived before the 1820s. The body needs the signal of genuine darkness to organize its sleep architecture. Blue light from screens suppresses melatonin for up to 3 hours. That suppression disrupts the circadian signal that tells your brain when the first sleep should end and the second should begin. Remove the interference, and the system often corrects itself. If you wake in the interval, do not fight it. Do not reach for your phone. Do not turn on the overhead light. Lie quietly, or sit up in soft lamplight. Read something slow. Reflect on what you have been thinking about. The historical record of what people did in this hour is, when you read it, genuinely appealing. They prayed, meditated, wrote in journals, spoke quietly with whoever was beside them, and processed their dreams. They treated it as a gift, not a malfunction. If after 20 minutes you feel genuinely drowsy, return to sleep. Most people who understand what is happening find that the second sleep arrives easily. The drowsiness is real. The body has not abandoned rest. It has simply moved through a natural transition. Now, it needs to be said clearly. Modern life is not medieval England. You have a job that starts at 8. You have children. You have obligations that do not pause for biphasic biology. Nobody is suggesting you restructure your life around a sleep pattern from the 14th century. And the research is clear that total sleep time matters. If splitting your night means you get 6 hours instead of 8, that is not better. It is worse. The goal is not to impose biphasic sleep. It is to stop treating natural waking as catastrophic, to understand what your body may be attempting to do, and to work with that biology rather than against it. For some people, particularly those with middle-of-the-night insomnia that has resisted every other intervention, simply knowing this history changes everything. Ekirch wrote that he received messages from people with insomnia who had read his research and felt, for the first time, not broken. Instead, they felt reassured, because what their bodies were doing had a name that was not a disorder. It had a history. It had thousands of years of quiet, peaceful, candlelit evidence that it was simply human. The 8-hour rule is not ancient wisdom. It is 150 years old. It was shaped by gas lamps, factory shifts, and an industrial society that needed its workforce unconscious on a schedule. Before that, for all of recorded history, on every continent where anyone wrote anything down, humans slept in 2 phases, with a quiet hour between them. They did not call it insomnia, they called it the watch, and they used it. Your body has not changed since the Industrial Revolution. It still carries the same circadian architecture, the same melatonin rhythms, the summer prolactin response in the small hours of the night. It is still, if you let it, trying to do what it was built to do. The only thing that changed is what we decided to call normal. The first step is the simplest one. Less light before bed, no phone in the middle of the night, and if you wake at 3 a.m., try, just once, not treating it like a crisis. Sit with it. Let the body do what 10,000 years of biology prepared it to do. You may find that the sleep that follows is the deepest you have had in years. If this is the kind of forgotten knowledge you are looking for, subscribe. There is far more where this came from, and most of it has been buried in plain sight for a very long time.